This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Oh, what do we got? Car inspections, hair appointments, work emails. All part of being an adult, I guess. God, I wish I were 14 again. It was so easy. I literally didn't have jack to worry about. Except school, but man, the older I get, the more I realize how much of a waste public education was. Especially with my job where I interact daily with school teachers. My, how your perspective changes with age. It's kind of the same when it comes to watching wrestling, I guess. When you're a kid, things seem so much better. And then you watch everything back in real time years later and you're like, God, that stuff was horrible. What was I thinking? Not everything, of course. A lot of the territorial footage still stands up. I'm only referring to the Attitude Era. I know that'll piss off everybody watching. But we're not here to talk about the Attitude Era today. We have other stuff in the meantime. The usual stuff. Crockett TV, Mid-South, World Class. It is the Friday edition here of the FSWR channel. As always, you can subscribe, like the show, comment. I appreciate you all hopping on board and coming back to watch the channel every week. This is a relatively new Friday format we're running with. We have added the Mid-South TV review series. And so far, I'm enjoying the change of pace. It's refreshing. It's so much less of a headache on Thursday nights. Realizing I don't have to torture myself with whatever calamity is happening on Wednesday nights with AEW. I don't even know anymore. Apparently more injuries. That's what I'm gathering. It's a walking hospital over there. Everyone's on crutches. Everyone's got neck braces on. I'm surprised no one's in an iron lung getting carted out to the ring every week. What a disaster. Just a complete and utter disaster. But I don't miss it. Not at all. Not a day goes by where I think to myself, man, I'm wondering what's happening on Dynamite right now. Or Collision. I'm really missing out on the good stuff. Nope. I just move on with my day. And that's about it. AEW gonna AEW. That's where I am. Get that on a t-shirt. With that said, why don't we go ahead and proceed with today's show? Because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. And of course, we will begin with Crockett TV. And after last week's main event debacle, I really did not know how to mentally prepare myself for this one. Luckily, the aggravation of that previous main event went away the moment we opened this week. And what should we see but a shot of the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, Michigan? And that is when it hit me. Oh, that's right. Today's the day. While yes, technically airing on tape delay, but this is a huge recorded moment that we're about to uncover in this episode. Probably the single biggest piece of wrestling news in 1987. Now, for those that are still in the dark and don't know, this was the show. This was where we saw the official footage of Ron Garvin defeating Ric Flair to become the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. Now, I believe the actual date for that took place on the 25th of September. So again, technically this was aired on delay about a day or two after the fact. But the moment has finally come. Ron Garvin, the first man to pin Ric Flair since July of the previous year, when Dusty was able to do it at the 86 Bash Tour in Greensboro. Garvin is now the new NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And while, yes, a very short-lived title reign, but this was a major astronomical moment in wrestling history at this point. And it's been a long time since I've gone back to see the footage again. Boy, did it bring back some memories. Now, we'll talk about everything in detail at the very end, because they absolutely milked that payoff for all it's worth. Now, we were back in the Atlanta studios this week, and our opening bout is the Rock and Roll Express versus Tommy Angel and Mike Force. And again, coming off last week's complete debacle of a main event, the no DQ tag match for the world titles that was not a no DQ match because nobody knew what the fucking rules were. Poor Ricky and Robert got swept up into that disaster. If you do not see me recap that main event, just pause what you're doing, go back and listen to last week's Crockett review. They had so much heat with me. I'm partially being facetious. Not about the match. The match sucked. But it's hard for me to fault the talents involved. They were just innocent bystanders in a no-win situation. Anyway, this was the typical rock and roll squash. Tony Schiavone kind of used it as an infomercial segment to run down the rest of the card. And Ricky ended up getting the win here with the flying crossbody. Didn't even break out the double drop kick for this one. Ricky was feeling extra saucy this week. And the same goes for his promo afterwards, because he was all kinds of fired up on this one. He's talking about how he's sick of the numbers game with the Horsemen. They're always looking for any window of opportunity to strike with the man advantage. At which point, they cut to some footage of a house show match with Tully and Ricky. And this is like one of the best clips of all time. They do the spot in the corner where Ricky goes to give Tully the atomic drop into the turnbuckle. And of course, the deal is Tully would fly back and then bonk heads with Ricky. So they both go down selling. And we get this unintentionally hilarious visual of Tully as he crawls out to the ring apron, and he basically dangles himself over the ring apron with his head on the concrete, and his feet are locked in the ropes. For lack of better terms, he's hanging upside down from the apron. And I'm watching this the whole time. Like, you can see his hand is extended outward. So I'm like, being very cognizant of what he's doing. I'm like, is he going for a gimmick under the ring? Is he trying to set something up? Is he waiting for JJ to slip him something? What is going on here? What is Tully doing? Well, we certainly found out JJ's intentions. They did not go according to plan. As he tries to wheel Tully back into the ring, Teddy is initiating the 10 count while both guys are down. And out of an act of desperation to keep Tully alive, JJ proceeds to try to hoist Tully's dead weight back into the ring. This failed. The visual of watching JJ as he's sucking wind, desperately trying to pull Tully's dead body up, Meanwhile, Tully's continuing to hang upside down over the ring apron the whole time. Totally lifeless. This was so great. It was just wacky heels being wacky heels. And of course, the payoff is Ricky gets to his feet before the 10 count. And JJ looks on totally disgusted with the whole thing. He just puts his head down in shame. I love this. It almost made up for last week's main event. It was almost as cartoony as the next squash here with Bugsy McGraw and Gladiator number 1. And if you know Bugsy, you know what you're getting in the ring. I mean, he was fucking horrible when we were reviewing his world-class matches in 1982. Imagine how much better he was 5 years later in Crockett Promotions. The answer is not much. He did all his usual Curly Howard mannerisms. Didn't sell a thing the whole match. He fired up on Gladiator with some jabs and punches at the end. And then he went over with a running splash off the ropes. It was almost as horrific as his post-match promo. Now, if you'll recall, the last time we heard Bugsy speak on this program, it did not go well. On top of him completely losing his train of thought midway through, he sort of just mumbled about random shit for 2 minutes. I had no idea what he said. Tony had no idea what he said. Guarantee you Bugsy had no idea what he said. So I guess as an act of punishment for having endured it the first time, somebody said, let's give it another go. How much worse could it possibly be? Well, it was quite horrible. I assure you. I wrote this down as a quote. I didn't rewrite it. I didn't summarize it to put it in my own words. This was a real sentence that Bugsy uttered on live cable television. And I quote, "Some people look at life and say, I wonder why. I look at life and say, I want a pizza." Unquote. And then he howled. He made some airplane noises. He yelled at the camera crew for trying to indicate where he should look at the shot. And that was it. You know, some people say it's not polite to make fun of people with CTE. Someone should have notified Jim Crockett about that in 1987. I can't even put something like that into words. There's Jimmy Valiant train wreck level television where you basically just expect him to go out there and rant about nonsensical shit for 10 minutes. And then there's Bugsy McGraw train wreck television where I just think to myself, they aired that? Why? Seriously, why? Why would you put that on TV? It contributed to the show in no way. It was just Bugsy McGraw being, I don't even know. I'm hesitant to say wacky. So yeah, that was a thing that happened. And then we come back for a special sheep herder squash with manager Johnny Ace at ringside. And of course, this is not the Bushwhackers version of Butch and Luke. They're not out there licking people's heads and acting like goofballs. No, they're just being serious, maniacal, ass-kicking bad guys. I almost forgot that that version of the Sheep Herders existed at one point. With all the stuff we've seen them on those WWF Retro Raw shows. And they went out there and beat Rocky King and Cougar J. Just dissected these guys. You know, it's interesting when you look at the timeline here. This is 1987. A little over a year from now, Luke and Butch are wrestling for the WWF immediately becoming a comedy act. But you just watch him here at Crockett Promotions. This is coming off the heels of the UWF buyout. So they're another established team that Crockett brought in from the territory. And I'm trying to remember what they did before signing with Vince. Because I remember they were around. I vaguely recall them working the '88 Crockett Cup. But off the top of my head, I can't remember who they were programmed to work with. And they weren't featured as a main event tag team either. I know that. But again, I look back at this period, and we all compare this period of the wrestling business versus Vince McMahon's sports entertainment vision. The Sheepherders are like the perfect model for those two visions. On the pro wrestling show, they're a malicious heel tag team that beat ass. On the other, they're molesting fucking fans with their tongues and acting like goofy comedy baby faces. It's absurd. Even in their promo after the break, Butch is doing all the talking here. And he basically took about 5 minutes to sum up a few talking points. They're here to challenge all the best teams in the world. Specifically, they want to fight, quote, the best in the world. To which I wrote down, I don't think Punk breaks into the business for another 11 or 12 years, guys. But they were ahead of the curve. No, in all seriousness, just listening to Butch cut the heel promo here, it's like, yeah, they're a little over the top. They're still sort of emulating a lot of the Bushwhacker behaviors, but they're still a legit team. You take them seriously, like they're crazy, out of control lunatics, and you actually buy it. You believe it. I never bought the Bushwhackers in the WWF, simply because I knew Vince was intentionally trying to make them comedy figures. It always felt like sabotage. Because I saw them well before they ever came to the WWF. And granted, I never understood the whole Johnny Ace thing myself. Again, a lot of their stuff stemmed from UWF footage from the late 80s. A lot of which I didn't have access to and didn't watch growing up. This is like one of the earliest things I remember Johnny doing when he first broke in. Because this is still well before the dynamic dudes were a thing. And those are some of my earliest childhood memories of Johnny Ace the wrestler. Him being the flag bearer of the Sheepherders. Yeah. Don't have memories of that being a thing. It was an odd fit. For sure. A lot of things were odd fits during this period in Crockett Promotions now that I look back. Especially when it came to a lot of this UWF crossover work. So after that, we pitched back to the ring for the Warlord versus Alan Martin. Yes, the Warlord is now back on Crockett TV. After his long stint in the Central States region, he'd been away for a while. Y'all remember, there was that really brief window where he showed up on Crockett Television about a year ago, being managed by Baby Doll of all people, when she was still a heel. And he was there, and then one day, he completely vanished, along with Baby Doll. We never saw either of them ever again. But it turns out my memory was correct. Paul Jones was on the show last week, and he was talking about his big secret member of the newly reformed army. It was like, I think I remember who it was. Didn't want to spoil it directly at the time, but I remember how he eventually branched off and officially formed a tag team with Barbarian in '88. Turns out my instincts were correct. It was the Warlord. And, well, now he's back. Definitely a lot more polished in the ring. Definitely more jacked since the last time I saw him. Holy cow. and he pretty much maimed Alan Martin in short order here. They had a great camera shot early on where they had sort of a close-up on the Warlord. All you see is him toss Martin out of the frame. Looked like the dude had been shot out of a cannon. It was awesome. It should be noted, too, this is before the Warlord was sporting the face paint. I actually forgot what he looked like without the paint on. It was weird. And, well, he basically did a million power moves and then one with a running power slam. And right before they cut the break, Tony did one of his better David Crockett impersonations where he says, "The Warlord's back. Look at him. He's huge." Fuck, I wish David were on the show this week. He would have dialed up the segment to 100, marking out for the Warlord's muscles. I honestly don't remember a whole lot about Warlord under Paul Jones's jurisdiction. Like the Powers of Pain, I have way fonder memories of that. But I don't think that pairing is officially recognized until later in '88. But this is how they brought him back. Under the Paul Jones Army, reincarnated. Well, it didn't last long, I remember that. So from there... Oh, by the way, this show sucked. Just wanted to point that out. If it wasn't already apparent enough based on everything we've talked about thus far. So thank God we got this highlight footage with the Midnights, Nikita Koloff, and Barry Windham. Because I was about ready to rip my hair out by this point. Literally nothing of value had happened until this point. And this, I believe, was taken from the Sunday syndicated show. The match is the Midnights defending the U.S. Heavyweight Tag Titles against Nikita and Barry. And while I believe this was something they were teasing on previous TV shows, the bigger story was all centered around the angle at the end with Arn Anderson. Oh, by the way, sidebar here. I have to point this out before I forget, because this is so goddamn funny. Do you all remember when people used to make fun of Brock Lesnar for how he would pronounce Bobby Lashley's name on TV? He'd always go, "Bobby, Bobby." It is exactly how Johnny Weaver pronounced Bobby Eaton's name. Same enunciation. Hilarious. What kind of accent did Johnny Weaver have? Had to be the same as Brock's. Well, anyway, the Midnights are getting the heat on Nikita. Corny is out on the floor making fun of him stumbling around by making vodka jokes. And eventually they do the big miscue spot where Bobby and Stan bonk into each other. That allowed for Barry to run wild for a minute. The fans are literally throwing babies in the air during this comeback. And finally things break down with all four guys, as they have a tendency to do with these kinds of chaotic environments. Barry hits Stan with a vertical suplex, and as he goes for the cover, Tommy Young is distracted with Bobby and Nikita in the other corner, so that allows for Arn to hit the ring with a folding chair, and he waffles this fucking Barry Windham right on top of the head. Just destroyed his brain cells. CTE for ages. And Barry goes down in a heap. Stan then crawls over to make the cover. Heels retain. So, naturally, who should be out next to take center spotlight and address the matter but Dusty Rhodes? Because, of course. And, well, if there's one thing you can accurately say about Dusty, he's never had a reputation for cleaning up very well. In the rare cases where he does decide to wear a coat and tie, he still breaks a lot of cardinal rules when it comes to dressing up. Such as, is it really that difficult to button the top of the shirt? so that we don't have to see the loop of the tie going around your neck. He just looks so disheveled and tacky. Like he literally got into a bar fight 5 seconds before coming out to do this promo. And he's talking. I'm literally distracted the entire time looking at this major wardrobe malfunction in front of my face. And he's covering the travesty of justice we saw take place. Talks about knowing Barry since he was 12 years old and says that he's a fighter. Now the Horsemen have pissed off another man who's in hot pursuit on their trail. And he eventually turned things over to Luger and did that whole deal. Among some of his more stellar quotes here, I wrote down, "Master of disaster." He also said something to the extent of, "I'm the kind of guy that makes you feel bad when you wake up in the morning." I can probably take that quote in about 100 different directions if I wanted to. And he basically promised to beat Luger with the Weaver lock. I would also like to point out for the record, none of this had anything to do with the video footage we just saw, even though Tony directly asked Dusty for his feedback on the video clip. Dusty Rhodes immediately made it all about himself. God love him. Unsurprising, but God love him. At which point, we come back for a Paul Jones promo alongside his newest talent acquisition to the Army, as we know, the Warlord. This is so fucking amazing. He's happier than a peach tree. He's just out there gloating about how great his Army pool is. And while he's talking about how great life is because of the power of the American dollar, the fact that he can buy and sign any contract he wants because he's wealthy, he then begins to start talking about his greatest talent acquisition, at which point, methodically, they begin to slowly zoom the camera in on the Warlord. And I'm thinking, man, all this build up, Paul's going to put over how great the Warlord is, talk about how he's the best pick for the Army to date. Wrong. While they're continuing to zoom the camera in on the Warlord's face, Paul Jones begins to talk about the 450-pound, 6'5", mighty Wilbur. At which point I paused and I said, "Excuse me? The mighty Wilbur? That's the bigger talent acquisition that you're bringing in? After you literally just brought the Warlord in, you signed him to a contract in kayfabe. We have not seen this man on television in well over a year. Shouldn't this be the showcase segment so you can put over how great the Warlord is? Talk about how massive and powerful the man is? No. No, instead, Paul Jones immediately shoves him to the back burner so he can put over the mighty fucking Wilbur. If I were a Warlord in this segment, I'd have broken this Paul Jones in half. Throw me under the bus like that. I'll show you, dude. And that's no offense to Wilbur, but seriously? The mighty Wilbur? Okay. Pause the show. Open up a tab. Do a side-by-side comparison of Google image pictures with the mighty Wilbur and the Warlord. You tell me which one is more physically imposing. It's got to be a story rib. I'm convinced of it. Paul's talking about how Wilbur is the most powerful, the most dominant, the most dangerous man in all of wrestling. I'm like, hello? There's a giant mass of humanity standing 3 inches behind you, dude. Don't anger him. This is a mind-boggling segment. Instantly, Paul Jones is no longer satisfied with his newest play toy. It's like Tony Khan. He's already moving on to bigger and better things. Allegedly. So then Kevin Sullivan wrestled Larry Stevens. More accurately put, Kevin chopped and slapped and kicked the living dog shit out of Larry Stevens. And this went on for about a minute or so until he beat him with a running double foot stomp. My notes conclude with, I think Sullivan was supposed to be a heel. The people cheered him like he was a saint. News bulletin in the year 2023. When guys dominate and smash over dudes in short order, it tends to get them over. You know what didn't get over with me, though, was Kevin Sullivan's promo after the break. You want to talk about literally going in circles, talking about nothing for seemingly 20 minutes? That is exactly what Kevin Sullivan did here. Okay, first he's running down all the things he's heard about the top guys on TV. He's talking about Jim Cornette saying that money can buy anything, saying that the Rock and Roll Express like to talk about how money can save the soul. Dusty saying that he's the heartbeat of America. All these poster statements trying to buy and sell the people that they're the real deal. But Sullivan says that he's the real deal. He says, this is almost a direct quote, I've come here to make people extinct because extinction is forever. All right then. I don't know what that means, but sure. I'll roll with it. And then he said that when it comes to getting in the ring with them, it's not about titles, it's not about pride, it's about survival. And then he walked off. I got nothing. I wrote down virtually everything of note I could find in this promo. That is all I came up with. Even Tony seemed flummoxed by the end of it. More flummoxed than Tony normally does after somebody gets done cutting a nonsensical promo. I think he's found more logic in Jimmy Valiant promos. So then we cut to the ring for Arn Anderson versus Art Pritz. At which point, directly after the opening bell, Tony Schiavone all but said, I'm still trying to figure out what the fuck Kevin Sullivan just ranted about for the last 5 minutes. Word. And then Arn won with a gourd buster in about 20 seconds. And then he cut the best promo of all time. Or at least what would easily rank among the top 10 best Arn promos of all time. He said that what he did to Barry Windham was cold, calculated, premeditated, and done with a purpose. He says that for 30 long minutes, he and Barry tore the house down for that Western States Heritage Championship. But the end result wasn't fitting for Arn because he did not leave with the belt. So as far as what he did to Barry in that title match with the Midnights, it was just Arn finishing the job that he started the previous week. He says the Horsemen weren't joking when they said they're going to take, and take from now on. They're no longer waiting for opportunities to arrive at their doorstep. They're seizing them. And that is not only a message to Barry, but for the rest of the babyface locker room. And they can take that to the bank. Yeah. Don't know if I really need to remind you all of this, people, but Arn Anderson, he was pretty fucking good. Can never overstate that enough. I'm glad he actually drew attention to that title match the previous week with Barry, because that was a very important match, or that was a very important part of the promo here, was recounting the fallout to that match. You know, it's not as simple as Arn costing Barry the U.S. tag titles because he's a dick. No, he had a reason. It's because he didn't finish the job. He didn't get the outcome he wanted. So he wanted to make sure he got the last laugh. It's exactly what Arn said it was. Cold, calculated, done with a purpose. Because he's a villain. And villains do that kind of stuff. It was great. Also great. Tully Blanchard versus The Menace. A real job guy they used on this program. And of course they fed him to Tully, which is the best part. I mean, he won with the slingshot in like a minute. There's literally nothing to say about it. Although I will note, there's like 2 kinds of Tully Blanchard on these studio shows, and there's never any middle ground. He's either super serious, pissed off Tully Blanchard, or he's playful, overly confident, gives no fucks Tully Blanchard. Here, it was the latter, no doubt. And the more I see of laid-back Tully in his matches, when he's just out there trying to have a good time and not take himself so seriously, God, is he great. It's especially great when we get to see both sides of Tully Blanchard's personalities in the same segment. So Tully's out here with Arn. And again, calm, cool, collected at first. Talking about Ricky Morton, making demands, trying to coerce Tully into agreeing to a one-on-one match. And while Tully's trying to have fun at the Rock and Roll's expense, here comes Jim Crockett. And he's here to crash the party. He saw that Tully was having a good time and he said, "Not on my watch, brother. Got to put these bad guys in their place." I love this too. Jim comes out to confront them. First thing Tully says, "What? You here to cancel another one of my paychecks?" Great heel line. Totally ad-libbed. No, rather, Jim is here to announce that on October 18th in the Omni, Tully will be wrestling in a lumberjack match, presumably against Ricky Morton, although I don't think he ever clarified that. But here's the catch. It is not just a lumberjack match, but all the lumberjacks at ringside are going to have possessions of leather straps. And if Tully tries to escape or weasel his way out of the ring, the outside wrestlers will basically keep him in the ring. At which point, going back to what I said earlier about how with Tully, he's either at normal blood pressure levels or extreme levels of rising blood pressure levels, and there's no in between. That was Tully in a matter of seconds here. From 0 to 1,000. Because he hears about the news involving this lumberjack strap match, and he's not having it. He's pissed. And this is phenomenal, because Arn and Tully are trying to rationalize in their heads, the hell does he mean the lumberjacks are going to have belts? That's not a fair stipulation. That's not pro wrestling. That's some outlaw bullshit is what that is. And you see the expression on Tully's face dramatically flip on a dime. Does the best job at selling that he's trying to maintain his composure, and then he finally just lets out, going off on how this is another example of Crockett using his power to rig the system. He's screaming for Jim Crockett to grab a leather strap himself and come out to be one of the lumberjacks. Says he loves fucking with the Horsemen so much. How's about he take part in the game? He'll probably have fun with it. Dolling up to all these baby faces. Because he's a spineless coward. And then Tully's promising to whip Ricky like a government mule. I couldn't get over how great Tully was here. Just watching his facials the whole time. The fact that he was able to get so animated at the drop of a hat. And I love, too, the moment Arn sees the facial change, he's trying to calm Tully down and go, all right, regroup. We can get through this. Amazing. I laughed so hard. Arn trying to prevent Tully from blowing a gasket. To no avail. I mean, if that Arn promo a few minutes earlier wasn't the best Arn promo of all time, this was certainly the greatest Tully moment in the history of Crockett Promotions. I don't care what anybody says. I mean, these two were the highlight of the show this week, no question. At which point, literally after just seeing the best of Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, we come back from commercial for our TV main event. It is Mike Rotunda versus Dave Spearman. At which point I wrote the following words. Bathroom break. Oh wait. Rotunda wins with the airplane spin in 45 seconds. Thank God. I have nothing further to add. But, as we round things out, the footage is in. The moment we've been waiting for. The excitement is building in the air as we catch the closing moments of Ron Garvin versus Ric Flair in the cage at the Joe Louis Arena for the NWA World's title. Yeah, I forgot to mention that too. It was also a sanctioned cage match. You know, it's funny. People often hark back to Garvin beating Flair for the title in September of '87. No one ever mentions it being a cage match. Which is, of course, the perfect fitting environment for Flair because, you know, he's going to bleed like a stuffed pig. And when they cut to the feed, it is David Crockett doing solo commentary, which was a joy in and of itself. And, you know, by this point, they're already approaching the final few minutes. Flair's a bloody mess. Both guys are totally exhausted. You know, everyone's on pins and needles with all the near falls. And here's basically everything that happened. With approximately 1 minute left of airtime, Flair and Garvin are fighting at the top of the cage. Flair crotches himself on the ring ropes as Garvin stands on the top turnbuckle. And as Flair gets to his feet, Garvin leaps off the top rope. He gives Flair a sunset roll through. 1, 2, 3. And David Crockett sells it with complete and utter shock. Stunned silence. Just about as silent as it was after I counted the 3 fall there. And the reality then sets in. Ron Garvin just defeated Ric Flair to become the world champion. At which point, everybody in the arena blows a gasket. And it really sounded like genuine shock. Because even David, like I said, he was quiet for the first 3 or 4 seconds after the bell. And then people finally woke up. And right as soon as David Crockett says the following words, he did it. It is immediately to the end credits. I'm not kidding. As soon as the word t in it crossed David Crockett's lips, that was the end of the show. They didn't stay on it. They didn't milk it. They didn't even show Garvin physically holding the belt. They just went to black. That was it. It was weird. Seeing the way they produced all of it. Again, considering it was on a tape delay, why not milk the reaction longer? This is almost like a Mike Tenay to the back situation, where they immediately take the piss out of something by cutting to something else completely unrelated. That's what this final shot was like. It was like, well, Ron won the title. Folks, we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. You don't want to stay on that for a tad longer? All right, then. Beyond the whole production decision, again, this is a very interesting moment in wrestling history. And I say interesting for a couple of reasons. You're always going to have the critics out there that hated the Ron Garvin title switch, thought it was dumb, thought it derailed Flair's momentum, didn't really understand the appeal of it. And then you're going to have the fans that loved it. The ones that said it was time for Flair to drop the strap, even if it was only for a short window and then he would eventually win it back, which was always the plan. Saying it was a nice change of pace. It was unpredictable because nobody expected it to happen in Detroit of all places so shortly before Starrcade. I mean, if they were going to do a title switch, that was the point where everybody would have expected to see it. The big event, the big moment. But they didn't do that. They did it earlier. And I think that's why it worked so well. And I'm sort of in a weird camp when it comes to the whole 2-month Ron Garvin title reign, because while I definitely understand the criticism, the idea that the title switch was stupid, didn't do anything for Ron Garvin, he had ended up just kind of becoming a paper champion, hurt the credibility of the lineage of the title. It was Dusty giving one of his friends a pat on the back for all his contributions to the sport, a charity move, blah, blah. I get all that. Can I really disagree with every single one of those notions? Not necessarily. And I'm not a particular advocate of giving somebody the Blue Ribbon Award. Hey, you paid your dues and your services to the company, so let's give you a short title reign. And yeah, it does kind of devalue the title in some way. And by that same token, how successful can you really call a title change if the guy only holds it for 2 months, has like 1 or 2 title defenses in the interim, and then drops the belt right back to the previous champion? They're all valid takes. And, at the time this actually happened, I was only a year old. I didn't live through the moment to understand how it may have impacted the fans watching, because there were a lot of Ron Garvin fans, and it is easy to forget how over he was during this point. But it was a big deal. And, Flair had essentially been undefeated as the champion since the previous year when he dropped the belt to Dusty. So when Garvin beat him clean here in the center of the ring a year later, especially in this capacity when people were not expecting it to happen, I can understand why it generated a lot of buzz for the product. And again, yeah, you can argue, shocking doesn't always mean good, of course. But I'm not one of those people, even as we've gone back and rewatched a lot of these Crockett episodes since late 85, we've seen the path of Ron Garvin. We've seen the interactions with him and the Horsemen. It's not like this wasn't built up to. The story progression of Ronnie Garvin in the NWA, that's been well documented. And it's been one of the better long-term plot developments they've done with any of their top babyfaces. You may not agree with the title switch, but you can't really argue it wasn't built up too well. This was not hot-shotted. This was not a last-minute decision, a desperate ploy because they wanted to do a Crash TV kind of booking segment. No. And they've kept Ronnie preoccupied with other storylines along the way. He wasn't solely chasing after Ric Flair. He was feuding with the Midnights. He wasn't only pursuing Flair for the last 18 months. And that would have gotten old real fast. No, they had Ronnie do other things along the way. And when the timing was right, they reintroduced the beef with him and Flair. They spent the last several months showing Garvin's pathway to get back to the title hunt. We know how much the moment meant to him. You know, we've seen the training footage, everything that's led up to where we are now. It's all been logically put together. Very well crafted. And I think where the disappointment comes with all this is how they followed up with it. You know, aside from dropping the belt back to Flair in 2 months, we're about to see how piss poor of a job they did with actually keeping Ronnie Garvin hot after the fact. Now that the pursuit of the chase has been accomplished, he's got the belt. What happens now? Well, as we're about to see, not only does he become a placeholder babyface champion so they can just switch the title back to Flair in November, but the stuff they do with him in '88 right before his abrupt departure, because that's the other thing to keep in mind here too. Kind of forget about this. Ron Garvin is only maybe around for another year or so before he's gone. Not gone as in dead, but gone as in leaving the company on short notice. There's the really infamous heel turn on Dusty next year that never really goes anywhere. We never really got a proper payoff to that storyline. Why they turned him heel to begin with, I'll never fucking know. That was still a dumb decision. But that was pretty much it for Ronnie Garvin. You know, he had the brief WWF run where he worked with guys like Dino Bravo and Greg Valentine. You know, he did some heel work there as well, but he was never really what you would call a big-time player. Just kind of meandered around the mid-card for his entire run. So if you think about it, we're starting to reach the peak phase of Ron Garvin's wrestling career. In fact, we've already reached it. This is it. The moment he dethroned Ric Flair to become the new NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And it's all downhill once we get past Starrcade. Not to directly go out on a sour note, but, well, you all know me, the bearer of bad news on this channel. Now, what do you say we turn the tables and talk about some Mid-South? We were about 3 weeks into the 1982 library. Sort of got a decent grasp on the main stories that have been brewing in the last month or two. For a while, we've been playing catch-up because we literally just started diving into the Mid-South shows in the last 3 weeks. This week, it was more so about trying to tie up some loose ends with previous material. And let's see. It was normal. We had Boyd Pierce and Bill Watts opening things up at the booth by detailing a couple important notes. The big event in November is the Superdome show, so they're trying to ramp up enthusiasm for that show. And that was actually a good segue into them replaying the Kamala hype package, because he was someone they mentioned was coming to Mid-South very soon. Next week, as a matter of fact. It'll be our first look at Kamala, the Ugandan giant, in the Mid-South region. And on the other side of the coin, there's all the fallout from the Mr. Wrestling 2 grappler match that happened the previous week. We're obviously well aware of what's been going on with the decoy grappler. Now, last week he had the run-in from the second grappler that caused a blatant DQ in that match. So while that mystery is still in the air about the identity of one grappler, now there's a developing question on who the second guy is. Even though I think I let the cat out of the bag the previous week when I talked about the identity of the original grappler. Pretty sure it was Len Denton. And again, with Mid-South being excellent and linking important segments together, that was the perfect pitch to our opening match on TV this week. We had both grapplers teaming up in a squash against Johnny Rich and Tim Horner. God, the visual of Tim Horner in his early years before he grew out the bleach blonde mullet. It's still weird. It's just like, in my head, I can't see Horner any other way except for when he had the long mullet. He was probably the lowest of the four guys here on the totem pole, even as far back as 1982. because Watts is putting over Johnny Rich more than he was Horner in this match. There's probably a joke in there somewhere that could be stated outright. In any case, here's basically everything I wrote down about it. Short grappler showcase. The heels did about 14 million moves in a row until one of the grapplers caught Horner with the Wrestling 2 running knee lift, followed by a grappler twist arm wringer for the pinfall. And when I say the heels did 14 million moves in a row, I'm not exaggerating. I think within the span of about 15 seconds, I saw one of the grapplers do an over-the-shoulder breaker, which Horner sold by grabbing his cheek, a backdrop off the ropes, a body slam, the running knee lift, and the arm wringer splash. Literally with no transition in between. It was like straight out of a video game. So for all the crap I give the indie workers about everything being move, 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 finish, well, even these guys had tendencies not to let things breathe properly. It was the polar opposite of JYD versus Billy Starr. The man that could literally get the most out of virtually nothing. All he had to do was fire up at the beginning, do a couple headbutts, a couple body slams, hit the thumper. 1, 2, 3. It's still approximately 3 or 4 moves more than Goldberg had to do to get himself over, but same principle. I also noted here as a slight jest, but the more I think about it, it's kind of true. This is now the second job guy with the worst body I've seen on cable television in the last 2 weeks, with the last name Starr. It is strongly urging me to legally change my last name and never look back. While I continue to contemplate that, let's talk about Mr. Wrestling 2 versus Larry Clark. Speaking of job guys with rotten bodies, Larry Clark. If Mayo had a set of arms and legs, it'd be Larry Clark. Again, not a whole lot to note about it. Another brief TV squash to put Wrestling 2 over. Most of Watts' commentary was centered around him mentioning Wrestling 2's unidentified age. But he seemed to imply he's old. Which, well, leave it to Bill Watts to find a way to refer to somebody as old, yet still find a way to make it complimentary. Now, obviously, if you think about it, that's the remarkable thing about Wrestling 2 during this time. Can't remember how old Johnny Walker was in 1982. Had to be at least in his mid-40s, if I were to venture a wild guess. I mean, physically, you could tell the guy was in good shape for his age, but he was far from the most agile in the ring. Still, though, he can move. You know, he's out there wrestling Clark in the mat and holds. All his amateur shit looks great. He's not getting blown up. He really was an extraordinary talent. When I went back and saw Mr. Wrestling 2 footage from this time years later, he was always one of the key standouts on the show. You know, even during some of the peak moments in 83 and 84 when business was really booming for Mid-South, you had guys like Magnum TA and Hacksaw, DiBiase, the Midnight Express, Butch Reed, JYD, like all these top shelf main event performers, Hercules Hernandez, Ernie Ladd, all these huge names. But Wrestling 2 was always one of the Mid-South original names that stood out to me. Even just rattling off a few of those names, it's amazing to think what's in store for us down the pike once we see a lot of those guys show up. But here was the point in the show where we got some story development. In what had to be the first and only ever unbiased lumberjack match in the history of lumberjack matches, Colonel Buck Robley wrestled Devastation Inc.'s one-man gang. And the faces and heels were not picking sides this week. They were doing their due diligence as the neutral party. Didn't matter if Buck was getting dumped out to the floor or if Gang was getting dumped out. Those lumberjacks were right there to throw their ass back in the ring. No one's taking a powder. No one's getting a breather. If you cross that forbidden line, you're getting tossed right back in, brother. God, it's so rare you actually see that in lumberjack matches today. You actually forget. Yeah, there was a time where lumberjacks were impartial. Ain't wrestling crazy sometimes? Now, of course, the story implications here, it's kind of what the match was built around. If Buck Robley can manage to score the win on next week's Mid-South programming, he will get... I'm not sure if they said it would be an assigned match per se, but we do know that Robley would get the General Akbar in the ring. And as we remember from the previous show, Buck Robley managed to pull a fast one on Akbar by knocking off his opponent in record time, faster than Akbar could win his squash. So Robley walked away with $1,000 of the General's own money. More so beat it out of him, but you get the point. In any case, they had this match. It was bad by wrestling standards. The smoke and mirrors of the lumberjack involvement, I guess, was supposed to make up for the lack of quality in the ring. It is what it is. But the important part was the finish, as Robley came off the top and clocked Gang with a loaded forearm for the 3 count. So indeed, he will get the General in the ring next week on Mid-South Television. And is it a match? Is it one of those 5-minute free-for-all periods where he can just have his way with the General and beat the tar out of him? Not exactly sure. Really was never made clear. But nevertheless, the timing of all this, it is quite suspect. On the same show that we'll be seeing the debut of Kamala, General Buck Robley just happens to have earned himself some ring time with the General. Alone. I smell a ruse coming there. It's almost like this was all pre-planned for story advancement. Because, Mid-South actually did long-term storytelling correctly. But I guess we will see what happens. Match was terrible, but it moved everything along in the right direction. And then we came back for Hacksaw Duggan and Ted DiBiase versus Vinny Romeo and Jesse Barr's hideous arm tattoo. That's one of those ink blotches that you regret the moment the ink's complete. An immediate regrettable decision. Quote of the week, however. This is the one point in the show where I actually bothered to write down one of Bill Watts' statements verbatim, because it was too good. There's a spot early on where DiBiase is trading with Barr, and Barr nearly catches him in a pinning predicament. Bill Watts says, and I quote, "Jesse Barr is a real comer. He's come on real hard." I'll bet he has. But I do not need to know his personal activities. It also hit me watching this, especially comparing the height difference between DiBiase and Duggan versus the two job guys. DiBiase and Duggan were huge fucking dudes. I don't know why it stood out here more than it ever did in the WWF. Which I know kind of seems ironic, considering it was the land of the giants. I mean, everybody seemed normal height by comparison over there. But seriously, it really stood out here. Especially seeing them work with these two jabronis. And they end up doing a series of spots at the end where Duggan hits his running tackle spear on Romeo, and then DiBiase followed it up with a power slam off the ropes for the pin. Fine squash. Not a whole lot else to say about it. The real meat of the matter is with what came next. Because after break, DiBiase and Duggan are still in the ring, and they're ranting and raving about this, that, and the other thing. Everybody saw them beat Mr. Olympia and JYD for the Mid-South Tag titles, fair and square. And because of a grave miscarriage of justice by the office, they were unfairly stripped of the belts. And of course, John Curtis is trying to tell them they're not scheduled to be out there right now. And they're basically holding the show hostage, and quite frankly, who's going to stop them? So here comes Mr. Olympia, basically to tell them to go kick rocks. And, it was a little more than that, actually. He tells DiBiase that he's already well aware of the fact that Dog is currently in the shower. He wrestled earlier on. He has no doubt, or he has no reason to be out here pulling double duty tonight because he was not assigned to work twice. And by the way, before I go any further, how Mr. Olympia was able to confirm that DiBiase already knew JYD was in the shower prior to this segment? What the hell was going on in that dressing room? Something we should know about? I don't know. Beyond that little faux pas, here's the bigger issue at play. Because right as Olympia is about to leave, and presumably try to get Dog to come out so they can have their impromptu match, sure enough, what happens? Well, the heels just jump Olympia and leave him for dead. What exactly was Mr. Olympia's plan? Was he really that dumb to think the heels wouldn't jump him from behind? Since he already had the numbers advantage? I thought Mid-South babyfaces were supposed to be smarter than that. Poor planning on Mr. Olympia's part. A dumb babyface this man turned out to be. A noble idea in theory for Olympia to defend the honor of the Mid-South tag belts. Terrible execution. So, well, then they cut to a clip of the Mongolian Stomper in Florida wrestling a pair of job guys. Gordon Sully was providing play-by-play here. As Don Carson, I wrote down, sort of did color. Carson was Stomper's manager, by the way, for those that didn't know. It's always enjoyable when you hear the stern babyface announcer interact with the over-the-top heel personalities on camera. Makes for great television. Really not much to note about the squash here, except for the fact that these job guys took a real beating. Okay, there's a spot here. Stomper tried to beel one of the job guys back into the ring from the floor. And, I mean, I'm not all that familiar with how the rings used to be set up with Florida wrestling, but it seemed like they were a lot lower to the ground. And Stomper goes to throw this guy back in the ring, and this guy did not clear the bottom rope. So the small of his back basically got tangled up in the ropes. It looked like he legitimately fucked up his back. Like he was noticeably limping for the rest of the match. I mean, I don't know what happened there, but somehow his timing got way off. And of course, Stomper won with the sleeper hold. And then he beat up the other job guy for good measure. I think this was mostly done to highlight Stomper's eventual Mid-South debut. As I joked about the other week, a very short-lived run that I do not think lasts all that long. Because I've seen a lot of Mid-South UWF footage in my day, and I don't remember much about the Mongolian Stomper in Mid-South. So if he does show up, it can't be for more than a month or two. This is going to be a real interesting taping schedule to view. just to see him work a handful of squashes and then disappear into the void. Well, you know who didn't disappear into the void? Was Hacksaw, Duggan, and Ted DiBiase. Now, these guys got their fair share of screen time this week, no doubt. And thank God, too, because they spared us a sanctioned Kelly Kiniski match. The small favors. Yes, what was originally scheduled to be Captain Redneck versus Kelly Kiniski turned into an impromptu tag match of sorts with Duggan and DiBiase versus JYD and Murdoch. Only thing is, even though we had an opening bell and a closing bell, Bill Watts was sure to let us know that this is not a sanctioned match. Okay. So why they had to ring the bell to start the brawl, I couldn't tell you. But they only had about 3 minutes left of airtime anyway, so had to figure there wasn't going to be a finish. No, instead, Dog and Murdoch literally just kicked the shit out of these guys until the show ended. You know, the heels are taking wild bumps. DiBiase and Duggan feeding like crazy. There are actually a couple of scary spots involving Duggan here where he got dropped on his head, taking a double backdrop from Dog and Murdoch. There was a spot where DiBiase came down and landed right on top of Duggan's shoulder. They were both tangled up in the ropes for a period of time. Looked brutal. It was funny during the last minute of the brawl. Watts kept shouting, 1 minute. 1 minute. 1 minute! Like he was audibly trying to cue these guys to take it home, motherfuckers. We're out of time. And the show kind of went out in pandemonium from there. Face is still largely in control of the action. It was definitely a bright spot. All this stuff involving DiBiase and Duggan. They eventually got their comeuppance at the end. You know, while moderately tame in terms of major angles or promos this week, they had some stuff to pique interest for next program. I think the big one is all centered around what's going to happen in the Buck Robley Skandar Akbar segment. You know, they're leaving a few subtle cues that maybe Kamala will get involved, but it's up in the air. And of course, there's a lot of excitement stirring with Mr. Wrestling 2. The issues with grapplers. You know, you layer that in with the Mid-South Tag Title program. They got a lot of stuff they're dishing out to hook people's interest. And again, this is all stuff that predates the peak era of Mid-South. And they just keep building and growing and expanding from there. And you definitely see certain shifts in the approach Watts took with guys that he would feature at the top of the card later on. You know, right now, even as you go back and watch stuff from 82, it's a lot of big, jacked up, giant guys. And they're getting the focal amount of screen time. But it didn't last forever. Even Watts started to adapt his booking philosophy along the way. And to think that would ever be the case, that Bill Watts was less stubborn than Vincent K. McMahon. You know, the man who believed in the land of giants since day one. Probably still does to this day. And that'll take us to this episode of World Class. Another stellar edition of Let's Book Killer Khan in the TV main event and try to make some magic happen. What is the magic? It's will he do anything beside chops and headbutts? The answer, more than likely, no. Anyhow, I actually didn't get around to watching this one until way later in the evening. I think it was Tuesday night. You know, so I was kind of scrambling to get through this one with minimal amount of pausing. And sometimes I'll do that with these shows where, you know, I can't type fast enough to keep up with everything going on. So, like, I physically have to stop the video for a minute to catch my train of thought. Otherwise, I'll forget something. This week, I was like, okay, 43 minutes. No time. Let's go. Time to retain information at rapid speed. And the question is, did I do a good job? And we'll find out as we get going here. TV opener for the week was Jake Roberts versus Joel Strongbow, better known as the Snake versus the Chief. There's a metaphor hidden somewhere in there. Mercer spent most of the match talking about how Jake Roberts is a, quote, product of society. I had no idea what the hell he was referring to, but he made that comment at least half a dozen times during this match. Jake Roberts, a product of society. I was like, what does that mean? Are we all products of society to some degree? We're part of evolutionary development. As always, watching Jake work is an experience in and of itself. I always talk about the subtle things he would do in his matches that separated him from the bulk of what everybody else was doing on the roster. The facials, the timing, the way he sold things. Like even the things where he backs off from his opponent to take a powder on the floor. He doesn't just walk out of the ring. He slithers. Because he's a snake. And of course, he gave Strongbow some offense early on. He was working over Jake in some holds for a while until Jake got control for the heat. I thoroughly enjoyed Roberts catching Rick Hazard off guard by teasing that he was going to punch him in the face. And then he did that classic Jake Roberts smile. Again, man, he was brilliant with the small things. And you look at that guy for 5 seconds, you're like, I wouldn't doubt for a second that guy would punch out the official if the urge struck him. Of course, Strongbow made a little comeback at the end, but it was very short-lived. Roberts fought back, dodged an elbow drop, and then he won with the patented DDT. Not as impressive as the previous ones I've seen him do. This one was more set up than the DDTs we've seen Jake do before, where he literally just hits the move from out of nowhere. Not really what you would call a squash. Got about 8 minutes, but it was fine for what it was. Just continuing to elevate Jake up the card. And I can't remember how far it is until we see him start feuding with the Von Erichs. I know he eventually does, but my timeline is still a little shaky around this point. But coming back from break, we had an on-location interview with Stella May French. And we all remember how I was talking about Jake Roberts' matches being experiences every time he's on camera. Stella May French. She is also quite the experience whenever we see her on camera. This might have been the greatest 30-second pre-tape of all time. Stella is here for an interview with Mark Lawrence. And of course, she's rolling in with her signature 18-wheeler. Even though it wasn't technically an 18-wheeler because there was no trailer hitched to the back. It was literally just the front of the truck. And as soon as she opens up the driver's door, it is all hands on deck. I actually wrote this down as a joke. But now that I look back at it, I don't think I'm entirely wrong in my assertion here. Stella May French is officially the female Scott Steiner of World Class Championship Wrestling in 1984. I'm not kidding. Put a live mic in front of her mouth. You never know what the fuck she's going to say or do. First, she informs us that she has a new 2x4, and it's got 2 sides to it. One side is reinforced with extra plywood, so it hurts Gino Hernandez even more. And the other side has a giant red streak on it to go along with that broad Lady Giant's ugly red hair. And for the record, yes, Stella referred to Andrea the Lady Giant as both a broad and a bimbo. Her direct statement was, She's a trailer park broad that Gino dug up from somewhere. And she vowed that wherever Gino and Lady Giant are, Stella will be there too, ready to kick some ass and bludgeon some brains. And as Stella basically openly threatens first-degree murder on live broadcast TV, Mark Lorenz turns back to the camera and casually goes, "Folks, Stella May French, she's back." To which I said, "Indeed she is, Mark." This was an amazing piece of television gold. There's no way they did this in one take. How Lorenz could keep a straight face is beyond baffling to me. I wouldn't have been able to. It was highly more entertaining than Wild Bill Irwin versus Mike Gallagher. Hard to believe, I know. The only thing entertaining in this segment was listening to Mercer refer to Skandar Akbar's turban as, quote, a Middle Eastern headband. Now that was comedy. Generally, the match was just a quick squash to give Bill Irwin a TV win. I don't know why, but they did. There was a really bad miscue in the early goings here where Gallagher got completely lost and forgot what he was supposed to do. And the only reason I knew it was a major fuck-up was that they tried the exact same move like a minute or two later and actually got it right. The spot was Gallagher attempting to do a leapfrog over Irwin, and he was supposed to catch him with a standing dropkick afterwards. The second time, he did it correctly. First time, he just sort of hit the ropes and ran at Bill with his head tucked down. So not only did Bill have no idea what Gallagher was attempting to try, but he couldn't grab a hold. He literally couldn't do anything. Gallagher had his entire head tucked under his chin. So he just kind of did a sloppy collar and elbow tie-up and then dragged him into the corner so they could regroup. Aside from that, it was just kind of some boring back-and-forth stuff until Irwin won with a pump kick. And while they were preparing for the next match in the ring, they cut to a pre-tape with Mark Lorenz in the locker room with, two men, actually. The first of which was Jake the Snake. I believe, actually, now that I'm recalling, I think it is the first actual interview we've seen from Jake in Dallas. And what an interview it was. A mesmerizing, captivating promo that you just can't take your eyes off. You know, Jake's in there talking about how since he's come to World Class, he's made very few mistakes, with the exception of underestimating one individual, Chris Adams. And, as he's running down Adams and talking about how he's going to right the wrong next time they meet in the ring, he also does a promo on Jules Strongbow. And it's very weird with the way this was edited. He was talking almost in a present tense about what he's going to do to Strongbow. That he's going to drop him with the DDT. He's going to make him suffer. And I'm like, okay, so this was obviously pre-recorded before the match happened, right? Did they just air this out of order? Because we've already seen Jake beat Strongbow. This is a good promo. Really good promo. Just very strange with where they put this in the show. By far, though, the best part of the exchange, right before Jake walks off, he's talking about how everyone's going to suffer at the hands of the DDT. And as he turns to Mark and goes, "You understand?" In that deep, cutthroat demeanor, Mark looks at him deadpan, and he goes, "Mm-hmm." And then Jake goes, "Good." And he walks off. I think Mark may have legitimately pissed himself as they shoot. That expression told the entire story. Jake Roberts put the fear of God in this man. And while pee continued to drip down his leg, here comes the terrorist for his half of the interview, Skandar Akbar. And he covered a couple pieces of business, one of which was not really explained all that well. He talked about a supposed 5-minute challenge deal where, I guess if one of Akbar's Devastation Inc. teammates lose to Gary Hart's teammates, presumably Chris Adams, then Akbar would have to spend 5 minutes in the ring alone with Gary Hart. I'm asking questions because I don't think it was ever made abundantly clear, but I believe that's what he was getting at. He also wants his men to receive a 6-man title shot against the Von Erichs. Again, I don't think he ever specified which team members that would be, but his implication was that they've been eluded of a title shot because the Freebirds and the Von Erichs got preferential treatment to settle their program. And now that the Freebirds are gone for the time being, it's Devastation Inc.'s time to bask in the limelight. They want the next title shot. It was not one of Akbar's better promos. He was very much stammering and bumbling his way through the dialogue here. But I sort of followed what he was talking about. I was more so fixated on Jake's dialogue. But that is where we cut to the ring for Norvell Austin versus Skip Young. And what I wrote down here as Norvell's tribute to the Killer Bees. About a year too early. I'm sure Brian Blair was proud. So, this little program was something that kind of surfaced very much out of the blue. Just randomly one week, Skip had mentioned something about the PYTs in a pre-tape and how they've been causing some issues behind the scenes. Obviously, he did bring up their history, noting that they had feuded over the years in other territories. But I believe we saw a PYTs versus Iceman Skip Young match a couple weeks back on television. That was the extent of how far they've gone in depth with this program. Here was just kind of a way to keep everything fresh. Honestly, wasn't a whole lot to say about it. I did note that Norvell got blown up like 3 minutes in. The match went about 8 minutes for the record. The heat portion was a particular slog to get through. Literally, Norvell just beat on Skip for seemingly 100 years. By the third or fourth time Skip got dumped out to the floor, I was checking in my clock thinking, how long are they actually going to go here? And a few minutes went by. Norvell tried to go up for a crossbody dive, but Skip rolled through and then cradled him for the pinfall. At which point, here comes Coco Ware for the immediate jump attack. It's funny too, because as Bill Mercer is acknowledging, hey, someone ought to come out to help poor Skip Young here, he's defenseless. Who should run out to make the save? But fucking Rick Hazard. Again. And I know Rick Hazard has done some jobs on TV before, so he wasn't a complete geek. He was at least a semi-built athlete. But like, were no other baby faces available? Where was the Iceman? Where were the Von Erichs? Where was Chris Adams? Any living, breathing soul that looked like a legit pro wrestler. Christ, I'd have run from Stella May French before running from Rick Hazard. Match was alright, though. I have seen better matches with Coco and Norvell on TV before. It was still far and away superior to the main event. This week, for the 73rd straight main event, booking Killer Khan in the final match, As noted before, these were rough times. It is Killer Khan and Scott Hogg Irwin versus Kevin Von Erich and Chris Adams. A very strange collection of four individuals to pair together here. I would use my let's draw random names out of a hat analogy, but I think I've run that joke into the ground plenty. But seriously, if there was ever a segment to epitomize random tag match, now at least here they had a couple different angles and stories they were advancing. Obviously, the Kevin Von Erich Killer Khan feud is pretty well known. Those guys have been beefing for a while. Factor in the Gary Hart, Skandar Akbar stuff. As usual for a lot of world-class main events, things are mildly tame and standard until you get to the proverbial four-way breakdown. A couple things to note here. I did catch the one spot where Killer Khan actually executed a standing clothesline onto Kevin. So the joke I made earlier, will Killer Khan actually break out more than standard chops and sloppy kicks? Well, the answer is yes. He performed one extra move. We also had a very odd jump cut about 5 minutes in. Like 1 minute I'm watching Khan work over Kevin, and then literally with no explanation, the video feed starts glitching out, and the tape just randomly cuts to Scott Irwin working over Adams in an arm wringer. Not really sure what happened there. Unless we can chalk it up to Killer Khan did something so hideously appalling, they couldn't even air it in 1984 at the expense of making someone look stupid. They were ahead of their time. So, blah, blah. You know, all the standard stuff you're used to hearing me rave about with world-class main events. Fast forward, babyfaces are hitting the running flurry of offense on the heels, including a signature double drop kick that would have made Ricky and Robert shed a tear. And Akbar eventually hits the ring apron and tries to choke out Adams with his, as Bill Mercer called it, headband. And there was a bunch of shit that happened here at the end that was hard to keep track of. It was really comical, too, because while the heels are trying to gang up on Adams, like Gary Hart's trying to get involved, he's chasing Akbar around ringside, Khan and Irwin are double-teaming Adams behind Bronco's back. Meanwhile, during all of this, literally everything happening in the background except pianos tumbling down staircases and flammable car tires rolling on the ring mat, there's Kevin Von Erich casually applying the Iron Claw to Killer Khan. I'm just like, is he purposefully ignoring everything going on behind him? Or is Kevin really that fucking stupid? Well, finally, Gary Hart pulls a 180 on the heels by shoving Scott Irwin off the top rope so Adams can cough, cough, steal the win. Which was a questionable act. But at least here, you can chalk it up to Gary getting the better of Akbar at his own game. And of course, afterwards, you got the babyfaces running the heels off and sending them powdering. It's amazing how much no-selling goes on in a lot of these post-match beatdowns. Like fucking Skandar Akbar's in there taking bumps, getting thrown around like a rag doll. He's just back on his feet seconds later on the floor, like nothing ever happened. Totally no-selling it. But the people were into it. It wasn't a horrible main event, just one of those typical world-class tag matches where you're just kind of waiting for the chaos at the end because that's all there really is to talk about. Plus, you know it's coming. You know, still being left in the dark about a few things in terms of story direction, but and they were definitely quick to pan to the outro credits this week. And we didn't even get the send-off from Bill Mercer. Exactly what happened on the Crockett show. They pulled a Mike Tenay at the very end. Generally, it was more of a placeholder show to try to keep the stories fresh without really moving the needle much. You know, we got some fun pre-tapes out of it, though, so I'll take it. Anytime we see Stella May French in her semi-truck, it is a win. So, that'll about wrap up another one here. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to check out the podcast. We will be back on Monday for the regular Monday show. We got Retro Raw, got SmackDown, we got NXT. And the following weekend, we'll be running down that premium live special that WWE is hosting on The Cock. Whatever that show's called. Fastlane, I think. Doesn't matter. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching, and take care. Peace out.